especially thank Jeb, who way back in the lockdown, in the winter, had this foresight to preserve this garden. And I remember him, when he did it, I just said, nah, that's not gonna happen. And then here we are. So it's really, thank you, Jeb, for that. Many of you may know this, but Barb Moriarty couldn't make it because of the change of date. She has a wedding to be at today, but she sends her love. I want to thank you all. I think, as you all know, this is I'm on the home stretch of my 3-year director term, and it's been a privilege and a joy to be, to try to direct, whatever that means. And also, I just wanted to say a word about Chris. We have other things coming in the works for you, but Chris Tillman has been teaching for us for 20 years and done it with elegance and grace, and he's irreplaceable, and I just think we should thank him with applause and cheers. Chris is my neighbor, and his office is right next to mine, so I know how wonderful he is with you and your work. Not that I'm eavesdropping, but, you know, I am. And also the music, you know, he loves music, and when you're not in there, then beautiful music comes pouring out. So anyway, Jeb is going to give you the logistics for today, and I'm just going to say thanks again.
I don't have too much to say. The reading order's down there, alternating. We'll start with fiction and go back and forth by genre. When it's time for Justin and Anita, I have a recorded version on my iPad. They'll be very small, but we should be able to hear them through the speaker. So we should have them. I think I won't be filming when they're up, but I would like to turn the camera to you guys and have you give like a little applause or shout out that I can splice in after each of them, just so that they feel like they were present, because I know they are in our minds and in our hearts, but it would be nice for them to feel it too when they see the video after this. And like church, if you're afraid to sit in the front pews, you guys can certainly move up if you can't hear, but I think that's all I got to say. Thanks. So is Susie here? Susie, you're up.
Yeah. Should we keep our masks on when we read?
There you are. Oh, yeah. All right.
So I don't know that this is actually doing much, so I'm just going to yell really loud and hope for the best. First, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's been part of my time here, my professors, my advisor Chris, who, lucky you, finally get to retire, to Barbara and Jeb and Lisa. And I'm going to read, I know I only have 10 minutes, so I'm just going to read a portion of a story called Avalanche Weather. It's just the first section of the story. How's the volume? Awesome. Okay. All right. Avalanche Weather. Part 1. Sea level-ish. A cottonwood canopy. A dirt path stumbling up, up, up over boulders and roots that overlook the Taya River. The trees are rubbed raw where hikers have long battered their way up slope. And at the base of the hill, the trailhead just 10 minutes back, Lauren Pfeifferman hunches against a tree. Our Lauren has never hiked before. Not really. She's plodded about in the woods. She's car-camped with friends and drunk herself stupid under a starlit canopy. But backpacking? Real honest-to-God hiking with a 50-pound pack? Today is a first for that. And Lauren can't help but ask herself why she's wasted her so slow to accrue PTO on a vacation like this one. Especially now, with everything going on, the whole world spinning backwards, unraveling. This hot July morning is the first and supposedly easiest of Lauren's 5-day hike along the historic Chilkoot Trail. The elevation map tells of a mostly level trailway, and Lauren has spent the last few months extending its narrative in her mind. That of conquering the coastal Alaskan landscape with ease, of ending the first day with herbal tea by the fire, her imagination unchecked by the knowledge that fires are forbidden in camp. She's young, after all. She's buoyant and determined and strong. But where did this hill come from so close to the trailhead? And why is it not on the map? Someone ought to do something about this. She, who is so powerless in other respects, should take charge here. Yes, she's thinking to herself, I ought to call my senator. This thought makes her feel a little bit better. Resolved, when my phone can once more commune with others of its kind, I will demand that money be earmarked for the betterment of park maps. So, here we are, hunching against a tree, catching our breath, glowing the neon glow of the newly kitted. There's irony in sweating so profusely in Alaska. It's kind of funny, and in spite of everything, in spite of literally everything, Lauren manages a grim smile. She considers taking off her pack and removing the jacket she wears underneath, but she doesn't. The thought of uncinching and unbuckling, of letting the thing fall to the ground only to have to heave it right back up again, the thought of succumbing to that humiliation, no, she won't do it. Instead, she unzips her jacket's armpit vents in the hope that air will rush in. No good. The air is too sticky, too thick. It clams to the outside of the jacket while a rivulet of sweat drips into the band of her sports bra. Yes, her sports bra. We might as well just come out and say it. 2 weeks ago, Lauren met with our doctor. She disrobed, put on a paper top, and leaned back. The exam table was situated beneath one of those deranged cat clocks whose eyes and tail rock back and forth. Lauren watched it, but the cat did not watch her back. Neither did the doctor, who trained her gaze on a spot just over Lauren's shoulder as she prodded us, right and then left. Her fingers were dry, their tidy nails buffed and dull. She kept pressing us and poking us and massaging us and... Is there a problem? Lauren asked. 32 years old, our Lauren. 32 years old, and a few weeks ago she found a pea-sized lump in one of us. A few days after that, she mashed us between metal plates for a mammogram, closed her eyes as the doctor wanded us during an ultrasound, clenched her fists as another stabbed us for the biopsy. And then, just 3 days before her vacation to Alaska, she received her diagnosis over the phone. Stage 1, non-invasive ductal carcinoma. Lauren hasn't taken off this restrictive elastane bra since the diagnosis. She can't stand to touch us, can't stand to see us. These appendages, her words, which have adorned her for half her life, she's now aware of us at every moment, feels us as distinct from her, as if we're not a part of her body, but are instead foreign objects that have been improperly tacked on. No wonder we've grown into our new omniscience. She even keeps her bra on in the shower. Her eyes, her back, her heart, she wonders which will be the next to fail her. Weeks ago, she'd have been sure to make it up this ungodly hill. Even 30 pounds over her goal weight, she'd have had the confidence in her ability to hike 33 miles overland, all the way to Lake Bennett, and that conviction would have spurred her on. But after the first appointment, the follow-ups, and the phone call, she refuses to believe the doctor's extremely optimistic prognosis. She realizes in this moment that whatever trust she had in herself is gone. She couldn't possibly have prepared for this. Her body, mutinous. We'd like to mention another character in our story, Max Reinhardt, in town from Pennsylvania. He's just now arriving at the trailhead, hours later than intended. Last night, he slept at an outpost a mile down the road, where the only availability was a room with bunk beds. This morning, he's grouchy, and his shin bones ache where they stuck out across the wooden footboard. He drank too much last night. He is now a man who drinks too much, and is hungover and ready to be disappointed. Everything disappoints him these days, ever since his wife asked for a divorce. Max passes the trailhead. He gains on us. Lauren has proceeded another 20 agonizing minutes up the trail, where she lets a group of day hikers pass. They bob their heads hello and then quickly vanish further up the path. She stares at the Taya River where it rumbles over rocks, splashing white and turquoise, full of glacial silt. She thinks she sees a woman crouched at the riverbank, but when Lauren blinks, the woman is gone. She is alone. What possessed her to come out here alone, always so fucking alone, after all that happened last week? After all that happened and she has no partner to talk to, they broke up, no best friend, they drifted apart, and she hasn't even called her mom. At the top of the hill, pausing, shutting down her mind, forgetting her mom, forgetting us, forgetting every stupid thing, and listening, letting the listening fill her with something other than herself. She hears a salt-laden river, insects in the moss, mosquitoes, all leggy and emaciated, dancing their war dance for blood, a remembered voice rising in the distance, and it's Shelley, her colleague. Hiking? Really? You? How dare Shelley act so appalled? The PET scanner, metal detectors at the airport. Scans of her body, de-shoed, illuminated on a screen, security personnel tittering, bored maybe. They've seen better. And were the doctors also nearby? Fat tissue like a halo. Got to lose those 30 pounds. Rib cage. And there it is, does her heart show up on these scans? The round mass of the... Dr. Shirley laughing at the sad, rancid one of us. Yawning and bored by her tragedy. Surely they've seen worse. And when word of her condition gets around at work, whispers floating down the hall. She's only 32, can you believe it? Lauren, stoically enduring. Rueful smiles each time she enters the conference room. She'd give them all the finger. Fuck you. A knife slicing us open. I quit. Shelley would lay it on thick. What a cunt. Just so freaked out for you. Praying so hard. I knew the sweetest woman who got breast cancer, like stage 8 or something. And she really rocked it, like embraced it and psychologically didn't let it get the better of her. And she kicked its ass, you know? I think you're really, really brave. You okay? A man's voice. Lauren whips around. How quickly Max Reinhardt has overtaken us. Narrow, scruffy, a little older than she, 35 to be exact, and wearing a thin black jacket and hiking shorts zippered off at the knee. His weather-beaten pack strikes Lauren as too small for the journey ahead. Carabiners hang from it like Christmas ornaments, hooking on a mug, a bandana, a hiking permit, a pair of flip-flops. The man oozes the contempt of a trail regular who's come upon a goddamn car camper, thinks Lauren. He is malicious and pleased to witness her moment of desperation. Also Lauren. Need a drink? He shakes his water bottle. It's whiskey. Are you okay? She says. Touché. He doesn't accuse her of rudeness. And a good thing, too. Our Lauren deserves to be rude. She doesn't have to be so polite all the time, not when the world is so hell-bent on screwing her over. She cinches her waist belt tighter, grabs the tube that hangs down her neck and bites the end of it, filling her mouth with water. She is, of course, pretending she only needs a moment to readjust. In reality, she feels like an idiot under this man's scrutiny. She has Velcroed a bear bell to her pack, a glorified jingle bell those jerks at the outdoor suburban superstore mark up and sell to first-timers like her, and she hates that it jangles with her every move. She imagines this man's distaste, wonders if he might launch into a lecture about a woman hiking alone or some patriarchal bullshit like that. He doesn't. He doesn't even smile. After taking a sip from his bottle, Max continues past Lauren and in less than a minute disappears from sight, around a bend or over a hill or through the foliage or whatever. Lauren sighs, trying to forget him, but knowing she won't. Knowing, actually, that she will obsess over this encounter for the next several minutes, if not several hours, until she reaches camp. Because she feels like a fool, bow-backed and sweating. Because surely he's judged her when he doesn't know the first damned thing about her. About us. There's one final character we haven't yet introduced. Without realizing what, she was seeing, Lauren glimpsed her by the riverbank, ghostly and diaphanous, a remnant overrun with desire, watching hikers as they pass. Who knows what has tethered her here for so long? What massive, enduring feeling? She's a tremor in the air, blue eyes filled with want. Like Lauren and Max, this woman has problems. Foremost, she's 119 years dead. Thank you.
How well can people hear me? Not well? Better? Better? Okay. I'll just start, and I'll say all my little thanks near the end. Birthday. We cannot choose the touch that makes and unmakes us, and I cannot hold this fat silence like a gift from you, Father, at my birth in a red sweater, cradling the red curve of my body, crying with life into your face. Neither of us knowing then how I would learn you, through pictures my mother kept, your hair a fierce obsidian smear, and face a brown crescent turning. The words are not enough to make this body carry the feeling. Your absence hot and ringing, wide as the O of my mother's howl as she screamed me into the world, and you took her hand in yours, whispered against her ear, saying, "You never have to do this again." First snow. This brighter day undoes me. I leave the bed so easily, stand in the kitchen's hard light, and watch the world deepen, everything be buried away. I think of my father that year, homeless at Christmas, and my blonde head sleeping fast in my mother's bed. Your small body growing all the time in the same town where my life was cleaved, and snow was humped up in white shoulders by the cars. I've always wanted a man to love me unspeakably, to bury his body in mine and die there, meaning live there and have everything. But weather has gotten in the way of living, and love has gotten in the way of dying. Your face in the curtain's shade is dark as my father's, same inky brow and plummish eyes. I want the snow to last for days, to pin us in here where we can unmake each other. Cold scatters the light strangely, and I am reckless with waking. I'll fight with you again. I'll bury all of this. Edge. At 8, my mother's parakeet dies, and her father leans to take its chartreuse face between his lips and breathe, pleading into the blue mount of its nostrils, fingertip rousing the pinprick heart. And on the floor around them, a battalion of toy army men fixed at attention, witness to forceful miracle on Minnesota floor. And against God and nature, the bird quakes with small living, lifts live again into my mother's hands. At 18, I ask a boy to choke me until my vision speckles. So he leans, beginning, until the room blooms with color and my body lifts its weight. And I see his face in a tunnel of light, and I see the work he is doing, my limbs dropping their grip on the width of him. And his eyes are watching my eyes slip the waking. And between my legs, a feeling breaks, animal-like, into frenzied sight. I step off the edge of noon, bedbound by light and longing, the cat in a white spool of silence by my side. I wait to feel the weight of my body subside with sleep, for the embodiment of living to ease for an hour, 2. I want to live like any other animal. I want to abandon this body where I found it, carry on some other way. Sleepless, I stand at the mirror, my face split by a dagger of sun. Would it were I could reach behind my eyes, shake this vision loose. Upon looking at Google Images for Julian of Norwich's cat, immortalized now in stained glass. Always a tabby in the illustrations, sleeping or watching her watching God. Could it be that the artist couldn't bear to imagine her alone? The fullness of that anchor hold, taut with faith and visions. Or is it true that she craved a face looking back at hers, a cat's bright voice splitting that quiet with song? I think of her bed, full those nights, with prayer and her body, and that cat curled in the bend of her waist, thinking nothing of heaven, but dreaming, demanding no belief. Okay, now I'll say my thanks before I read my last poem. Thank you, of course, to all my peers for your genius and for your friendship. Thank you to my instructors for your patience and your empathy. Though they're not here, thank you to my family for being supportive even when they had no idea what I was doing. And thank you to Patrick, who's somewhere on the other side of the wall, for being gentle with my fierce heart. This is actually the last poem in my thesis, so it seemed a fitting place to end. Dream in the shape of a horse. The farm where I never visited you is covered now in snow. I startle a doe at 6 p.m., living silver, moon come loose before me. I wish I had said what I meant to when your hair was parted down the middle, drinking coffee in April shade. Your dogs still come to me in sleep, as if the rivers could not deter them, and your name takes flight across my bedroom, blue tree of grief, shouting its branches. Thank you, guys. So just to keep it brief, thank you so much to the wonderful professors and my peers and Barbara and Jack. I'm just going to read about half of a story called Stillness. It had been 40 days since Frida's stint at the hospital in West Orange. 40 days since her body spluttered to a halt during Saturday services at synagogue, in the confused, clambering space between rising and bowing, though no one at first, save Morris, slowed, a widening gap looming between what he saw and what his body was capable of doing. Immediately noticed, amid the shuffling of Sidor pages and the creaking of knees that had formed in the soil of old-world Poland, and the wrappers of hard candies crackling, bribes parents had meted out to their finger-twisting, tongue-clicking children, and the unmodulated whispers of those whose hearing aids kept screeching in and out of pitch, the swish of taluses as men stood and sat, until Frida's body abruptly folded in half like an old pincushion, limbs slunking into the pew before her, and then there swirled an unceremonious thicket of shouting, of, "Where is Dr. Rubenstein?" and "Where is Dr. Feinberg?" and "Where is Dr. Rosen?" even though he was actually a pediatrician, and everyone knew he should have retired at least 5 years ago, his fingers chewed up by rheumatoid arthritis. And only quiet Ethel Sadarsky, a fragment of a woman who always came to synagogue alone and slipped out, ghost-like, immediately after Kiddush, never staying for a plate of whitefish salad or even a slice of gefilte fish, who had watched a man's life drain out of his veins in a frigid forest just outside of Warsaw, had seen his cheeks deflate and his eyes calcify into marbles, and whose face appeared, even now, 20-odd years later, sometimes in her dreams, even though he had really been no one to her at all, had the sense to press two quiet fingers to Frida's neck, feel for the pulse, striking away beneath the skin, which was timid but there, and then thought, yes, it's all right now, the oxygen ballooning back into her ears as someone dialed 911 on the payphone outside the Hebrew school classrooms, and the ambulance sirens began to sound on the opposite end of town. It had been 40 days since the white-walled hospital, Frida soon intimately familiar with the elevator's pervasive scent of chicken soup, and the fluorescent lights she passed beneath on the stretcher, like police spotlights, made her feel she'd transgressed to be there, and the way a certain plump-faced nurse, fastening a blood pressure cuff around Frida's arm, leaned in so close her flowery drugstore perfume made Frida's eyes water, and the way the reedy doctor, recognizing her accent, looked at her askance, at her 2 daughters stationed at either of her elbows, one jumping in with a missing English word when her mind offered up only emptiness, and the other snatching up and filing away the medical jargon the doctor dropped like breadcrumbs. Afflicted by not a scrap of Frida's anxiety, Frida's shyness, the feathery quality of Frida's voice, for her daughters were American, had shed the vapors of their German accents by 4th grade, had surpassed Frida's height by high school, had both married Jewish men they'd met in college. Men who were kind to their mothers, and shoveled out hers and Morris's car after blizzards, and had grown up nourished by sugary cereal, and parents who told them they loved them. And then, though they would never split the cooking or cleaning evenly with her daughters, and would occasionally succumb to protracted spells of stubbornness or anger, they would care for Frida's daughters when they were ill, and massage their feet when they were pregnant, would show unabashed affection to their children, as the men of Morris's generation had never known they were meant to. Her daughters' husbands, clothed in suits, waking up their children before they left for work in the morning, reading them bedtime stories before turning off their lights at night. And so it had also been 40 days since the doctor had asked her, "How many cigarettes a day do you smoke?" again and again, though the answer was none, and, "Can you tell me about your consumption of fats, your stress levels, family history of hypertension?" Dorothy and Eileen exchanging meaningful looks, particularly at the mention of family history, which Frida neatly evaded. Behind her, in a plastic hospital chair, Morris sat with his graceful, wrinkly hands clasped tensely in his lap. Frida knew, even without looking, the stony cast of his face, the inscrutability of his dark eyes. Knew also the little tics that might betray his fear, a twitch of his eyebrow, or a clenching of teeth, visible even when his mouth was closed. The latter of which she'd noticed in him only a handful of times. Not when he'd passed the boxes of belongings to the German customs officer as they prepared to board the ship, and not the first day at the glove factory in America, and not even when Eileen's infant body had gotten stoppered between Frida's uterus and the world during her delivery. Fly caught in a web, the pitch of the doctor's voice swelling precipitously, while everyone else grew silent. But on the day they'd married, as Frida's parents marched her down the aisle of the smallest synagogue in their Bavarian town, the few neighbors in attendance humming anxiously in the pews, and she had glanced where she was supposed to, and through her veil saw him standing there, so pale and solemn, as though he were awaiting the angel of death. Looking back, she could not tell whether the fear in his eyes had been the germ of a premonition, or simply uncertainty, now allotted undue weight. It had been 39 days since the reedy Gentile doctor stood at the end of Frida's bed, explaining how the abnormal rhythms of her heart had momentarily impeded blood flow, cut off the organ's oxygen supply, causing part of it to die. Frida imagined the muscle turned to a gray, desiccated slab of meat, now suspended peacefully at her center as her body orbited around it. And Eileen thought of the neighbor's cigarette smoke that had wafted up the stairwells of her parents' apartment building, creeping under doors and through the cracks in window frames into their sitting room, as her parents made their way, inch by inch, through the American newspaper in the evenings. And Dorothy thought of Frida hunched over bits of leather in the kitchen where she and Eileen had been children, her mother sewing neat stitches late into the night. as the hours expanded, gathered weight, and settled. Dorothy thought of her mother that first year in Newark, pausing unknowably to shut her eyes as she mixed the batter for spice cake the night before Rosh Hashanah. Her mother holding hers in Eileen's hands at ShopRite when they were children. Frida's blue eyes flitting nervously over the cartoonish packaging of breakfast cereals. Alarmed at the loud-voiced woman from synagogue, manhandling cuts of beef in the kosher aisle, reverently examining bundles of asparagus and leeks in the produce aisle like artifacts in a museum. Morris thought of the hills behind the small Bavarian town where he and Frida had grown up. How on lazy summer afternoons, after finishing their chores, when the grass was still fine and soft, they'd roll down the slopes on their sides, heads facing one another, and then, sun leaking red through their eyelids and hearts pounding, would race one another back up again. Somehow they'd done this for hours without growing queasy, but he remembered the ache contracting his throat as he doubled over, exhausted, at the top of the hill. And the sight of her, skirt swishing, running straight at him, her hair, it seemed, absorbing all the sunlight. And then the sensation of his tongue curled up like a hard stone egg, sudden stranger in his mouth. She would take a blood thinner daily, said the doctor. She would lie in bed to rest her overtaxed heart.
It feels really good to share poems without a mask. Thank you, Lisa, and Rita, and Deborah, and Kiki, and Brian. You poured your attention into these poems and to me and helped me find my idiom and my practice. Deep thanks to Greg and Charles and Brenda, who have been my teachers in many ways. Thanks also to Stephen and Jahan. Thank you, Barbara and Jeb, who made everything possible and kept us going, especially this year. Thank you to Bobby and Emily and Sean and all who read these poems generously as they were coming into themselves. Thank you to my students who kept me grounded. Thank you to my parents. I love you. And thanks especially to Holly, who came to Virginia, and with whom I am at home anywhere I go, anywhere we go. You are in all of these poems. And thank you to my cohort, especially, and all of the people in my workshops. It's been great. For most of my childhood, my parents moved around a lot, and many of these poems come from a search for home. If you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are. Sun and the trash trucks siren down the alleyways. The pigeons warn each other nothing in the palms. The pink shade of a grapefruit rolls off the neighboring tree. Beneath the carport, a lost Christmas bauble. The bird shit crusts the aloe vera. The yellow dog barks through the chain link. Afternoon in Phoenix, 1990. The white paint cloaks the necks of citrus trunks. The cold, what cold there is, glares off street signs. The cold glares off concrete. Why would no one ever say a word? 40 trials in my errancy. What I did not father could not know, was thunder carried under tire tread, our floorboards carried me. One ear turned above, one below on the blue back seat, looking out your windshield as though clouds were, as though heaven was always had been here, down here, a little lower than mind, aloud, where animals not only talk, but daydream all memory fragments. Thus lyrics, thus lyre, father, further, did not know I was counting stretched moons of highway paint, as though I could tally our aimlessness. Never was I bored thus. The pit of mind I follow and must climb, must listen myself back out into place, this here-ness, flesh soft, little pine cone in hand, chunky seed. Fallen, I imagined from the highway bridge we had passed. Under, I imagined it, further through the roof, not impossibly with reason wasting time, to make up the world up as I go. This and that clippings, like I had someone else's father, someone else's memories further all my life. I have been running water, no, running in water. To forget this would release me from abstraction, from belief. What did not I know to alter was, Father, how to tire, how tired I would become before I learned to love the world as though our moving entered me, has kept me turning over. At night, do you remember fog north of Julian, as though sky, as though heaven were our luminous screen? Wrapped around your windshield was thunder under floorboards, thunder driven slow, my head on the lap of dark seats behind you. You thought I was asleep, I was awake. The other boy. I divide my toys below the big window, set my lion closest to me on the concrete patio. Above my head, my father's books rise like dark towers through the redwood tree reflection. I kneel, offer the other boy my zebra instead, my giraffe. Somewhere in the world is a place where it's night when it's day here, I tell him. Let's pretend that's where this is. Phoenix sketch. We never return. Once they consent to lead me through my first art museum in the city. Air-conditioned, bare-shouldered architecture. Too much in the way a desert landscape filled with cowboys, pale cocks dip out between the open chaps, obstruct both sunset and ridgeline. Their shared gaze briefly fills the canvas as they wait for the moment to compose into something they might wish to understand. Too much loss twisted through an installation hospital bed, its eulogy of embroidered sheets, elastic ribbon, cursive stitching letters to the dead. Too much shadow, echoes in the video cave. In the car, how easily they talk eternal judgment. Buckled in behind, I fill blank pages. A hair pierced into her gold chain clasp. His narrow mole, a private vanishing point. Voices I have heard before, weaving between the backs of their heads. Some trees, too. Warm morning on our back deck. Slow yoga of the bamboo. discipline of the squirrel, patience of the chestnut snack dropped and lost into a dry leaf shuffle then found, gray claws in the green and tan bamboo I hear behind me, slow wave on the back deck. I want joy I do not know I have been living. I want peace beyond the bounds of my own body, some life in the afterlife, some trees too, a little bird song even, the way I get up and move on, all that gone. Days like my lost eyelashes, just dry leaves curled there and here, a few in the gutter, one or two at my feet, before someone sweeps the fallen all away. Is anyone incapable of finding a figure for loss? Is there actual silence inside the body? Actual light as well? I can't decide if I want this world or another. Better not. I'd better not. And this is my last poem. Thank you. Is that okay, James? January. Here are two baby sand sharks my cousin Jay and I catch on the excuse me. Here are two baby sand sharks my cousin Jay and I catch from the wharf in Monterey or Oceanside. Waves below the wood planks and rail wash a minty green, and sudlines crack the drifting surf facade. A brief, cutting air. Two pups, we slip curved into the bottom of a white 10-gallon bucket filled halfway with seawater. We prop our rods like masts against the banister and reach our hands in. Handling one, it seemed to be a fat, chilled noodle ready to slip away. The open wounds behind its eyes pumped like mechanical wings. Each time we put them down back into the bucket, they would swim in the shallow water in the plastic container, touching one another's tail fin to the other's blunt brown head. My blonde cowlick pinwheels in the breeze that flags Jay's brand new skateboard t-shirt, captured, as we say, in the photograph. We lift each one once more before we leave, into the wind and throw them back to sea. I watch mine from the banister above the cold crash of waves hard as rocks, curl, fall. Last night after the dishes, our house quiet, I was reading, and you from somewhere down the hall came up with both hands over your face. So we walked together to the bathroom, and I saw down at the scoop in the back of the porcelain our baby comma, a russet pebble color stilled in clear water, minuscule mass at rest, stopped like a watch. Floor tiles hard and cold made our voices sound like glass breaking, and that clang and flush we heard like a clang and roll of thunder off the rim of the sea. Thank you.
It's going to take me a minute to set up Justin, so why don't we take advantage of the nice weather and finally actually being able to see each other and say hello to each other for take about a 10-minute break, and we'll start up in about 10. Back. So I'll go ahead and get Justin started here. I don't think you're going to be able to see him. I couldn't quite swing the large screen, and LCD projector, but we'll at least be able to hear them. And afterward, I will, if it's okay, I will swing the camera around and get a shot of everybody cheering.
Well, it does actually have to record that way.
And now I think we're back to live.
I wanted to thank Lisa, Deborah, Greg, Brian, and Kiki, and Jane as well. Wanted to thank Barbara and Jeb, my cohort, Anita, Andy, Betsy, Mary Claire. I love you all. Fiction, I love you all. All the other poets, I love you all. I also want to thank Ben, Bella, Rose, and my best friend Wendy, and my family. Most of my poems are about where I grew up in the Midwest, so just try to imagine that as I'm reading. I have 5 poems. The first 2 are poems I wrote my first semester here. I rediscovered some middle school diaries and wrote these middle school crush poems. Fantasy 3, Tuck Everlasting. Sitting beside the boys' elongated bodies, I couldn't watch the movie. We'd read the book, knew how it would end. The film light shifted across Luke's face like water across a starfish. I knew I could watch him until I died. I dreamt he'd cross the rows of desks between us and cover my mouth with his pink kiss. All the school would spin, the girls floating in dresses like refuse. Stupid Winnie. I'd feel sorry for her, while Luke's body held me down like gold. I'd be his shining, when his star shape draped across me. I'd swallow his whole name like a coin. Fantasy 2, Nicholas. Oh, Nicholas, your Melvin's t-shirt, black Vans and blood blisters, waxy scar splitting your eyebrow. I want you all, even the scrapes on your palms. Where do you go after school? How'd you get that bruise? I saw you at the loading dock where the teachers smoke, lighting a black clove. Who will be the one to suck your finger when the saw slips in vocational? When your father makes bail and your brother's not there, will you seek me, find me reading under the park shelter? From the bus window, I watch you walk bookless through empty tennis courts with your skateboard and carabiner. Every day, a fresh cut. Every day, Nicholas. A couple things about this next poem. Also, can you hear me okay? Okay, cool, thanks. This is for my dad. The you in the poem is my dad, but the first half of the poem concerns his father. So I just want that distinction to be clear. And his father was a German soldier. And also, the first syllable of my last name, Gottschlick, is Gott, which translates to God in German. This is Guzzle in German for my father. When you were born, your father swore, "Save me, God, and I'll give you my son." Then, passing a farm, the darkening barn, he heard her, warbling to the cows in German. He'd snarl at your mother about the house, then swing and fall like a plane shot down. While he slept, she crept around, tidying, silent, in German. You remember him, red and sunsick after laying concrete, a sunken ship in the TV lights. Half safe then, your blitzed colossus with a Nazi eye, your father, the half-dead alcoholic. His debt follows the blood, our inheritance, our bodies slick and flimsy ladders. When you're drunk, the fat tongue, I swear you're speaking German. At a private facility, you detox in a bed too small to sleep in. You say you just lie awake. The body so blade carves away your German. Where was God today? Nowhere near. Your father, a dark barn you turn from. Above, heaven bleeds, and the angels shriek in cold sweat, ripsawed German. I am your daughter, plagued and loving. When I was born, you held me in your arms. You couldn't stop God from speaking. Gott, Gott, Gott. His name and my name in German. Got the shaky legs. Gotta wiggle it out. Okay. This one's called Precious. When she smiles, my doctor's teeth are straight and white as little lab coats. Fine lines score her eye bones, and the diamond on her finger, big and boxy as a molar. She tells me to slide forward. Above, speckled ceiling tiles, palm fronds, a crystal strung up with fishing wire. She glides her hand into my vaginal canal and touches the blind eye. When my sister was 7, she found a pearl on the carpet at church and tucked it inside of her ear. She screeched and cried like a trapped animal as our mother used tweezers to pry the pearl out, and our grandmother held her small head between her hands like a bowl of hot water. After, my sister hid the pearl in her secret jewelry box. She never told me. After the first time she had sex, and I never told her mine. I don't remember. I woke up a turbid body lurching to the bathroom where I vomited pink liquid heats and the scent of faux raspberry. I lay down on a bunch towel and let the tile cool me. On the door of the exam room, a descending graph of the female reproductive system. A girl in utero holds 6 million eggs inside of her. At birth, 1/3 this number. By 30, 1/60th. I was never taught the body was precious. My mother thought she was bleeding out the first time she got her period. She hid it, too afraid to tell her mother she had stained a garment. My grandmother wore dentures and tinted trifocals. Her teeth turned soft after 5 consecutive childbirths. Her right eye, bald and white as a nimbus. We lived together, 12 years, my sister and I, tucked inside our mother's body, our mother tucked inside our grandmother's body, all of us tucked inside the house, painted pinkish gray, like an infant. Between our eyes, my sister and I could speak without speaking. Her gaze held me in place through shocks of days. Who would ever believe that? When I was young, I was small and dense as a star. And this will be my last poem. It's for my mom, who is also the person who my thesis is dedicated to. And I've added 2 extra lines on at the end that's not actually in my thesis, because I think it makes it more dramatic. So, thank you all so much. Eastertide. My mother wants to repair the balcony and the concrete front steps, which are sinking. They'll push into the foundation like an impacted tooth. She's preparing the house for market. She's retiring in June. For 40-odd years, she worked as a nurse, snaking her scope through the bowels of patients. Now, around the yard, she totes the green garden hose to shower the sweet pea with their prim and peevish faces. Her second husband conspired to sell the house out from under her and flee the country. He told her on his deathbed, meaning to cleanse his soul. Now, every time she cleans, she finds another gun. She says she wants them gone, and his antique clocks, each missing various parts. They just hang on the walls, dumb as books. All my life, my mother and her mother tried to muscle into middle class, like trying to get up in mud. At dusk, deer eat the blossoms. Nothing stops them. Or the moths in the linen, or the whole house sinking down. Steel town, built on dunes, sprawl on marsh. When it rains, every bone comes out of the ground. My mother doesn't mind. She wakes at 5 and lifts the deadweight son. What's a man ever done, she says, but leave a job unfinished? Thank you.
Hello everyone. Can you hear me? Good. It's so wonderful to see all your faces, to see everyone in the flesh. I'd like to just thank everybody who's been a part of my time here. I'll start with Chris, who's been a really wonderful and generous advisor. Thank you. All my instructors, Micheline, Jane, and Thomas, who is on my thesis committee. Jeb and Barbara, you guys are the software of this program. Thank you so much for everything you do. And of course to my peerless peers, you've changed my life, so I thank you, and this is for you. This is called Metropolis, and no need for introduction, I'll just get right in. Okay. It was in an underground train between Dickman and South Ferry that Nima found an unlikely companion. This was the gift of the one train to a fledgling New Yorker such as herself, which is not to say that she was new to the city, but that she was new to the subway, and that in a place like New York this amounted to the same thing. She would come to learn that riding the subway on any line was to encounter the remarkable, the senseless. Take the untidy man who, on her second ever subway ride just 3 months ago, announced his misfortune to car after car of the people on the one. If you could all just give me 1 moment of your time, please. I am an indigent. I have no car, no family. I live on the 6th train. It's where I eat, where I sleep, day after day after day. I need 1 night away from all of this. Just 1 night. Somebody. $30, please. This is a Hail Mary. In hindsight, it should have been obvious from the start that this incident was harmless. But the moment the untidy man began to shout, Nima, who associated the shouting of men with imminent danger, was seized by the desire to exit the train, to get far away from what had the potential to become catastrophic. This was her second fear about the public spaces of great cities. Her first and most prominent fear was of the terrible filth that swirled around. Once, on her way to deliver some homegrown goods to the uncle of a friend, millet flour, loofahs, shea butter. She had taken the 3 instead of the D, and gone all the way from Atlantic Avenue to Tremont before realizing she was on the wrong train. She was not immune to gales of absent-mindedness, but in truth the fault lay with a young woman a few seats away, applying heavy contours of makeup. The shock of such a thing, not because the woman had done this in the nimble space of 5 stops, but because Nima could not fathom how any decent human being could expose the pores of her lipsticks, the skin of her brushes, powders and creams that she would again use, to the bacterial Jerusalem of the New York City subway. She remembered her brother's warnings about New York, that it was a place where one had to be rich or be an animal. Then there was the L train, which she discovered to be just as miraculous as its numbered siblings, for the sole reason that so long as she caught the L at Bedford Avenue between 3 and 3:10 every Saturday afternoon, she was sure to encounter the same brown-haired Brooklynite reading the New York Times. Always the Times, and always on a Saturday afternoon at Bedford. The woman, a redhead, seemed also to take note of her counterpart. She'd look at Nima for a good while, smile as though appreciative of her Saturday ubiquity, then return to her reading. Nima imagined at first that the woman's overtures might turn into something more, but she would come to accept that metropolitan sorority could begin and end on a 6-minute train ride. This kind of neighborliness wasn't always a given. Recently on the 2 train, she'd stood next to a small brown man, ignoring his many advances. He'd made a loud fuss about it as the train pulled up to his stop, called her stern as fuck as he made his way out. She lifted a middle finger at him before stepping aside to let him pass. Then, 2 days later, her brother had sent her a screenshot of a tweet that had gone modestly viral, a picture of that angry moment by user @TrackingMonkeys44, captioned, "Bonobos in heat." These days, she behaved much better on the 2 train, where, in the last 2 months, her life had finally settled. She was ritualistic in her use of trains, and like Elizabeth II, rode only with gloved hands, her old cotton tote held tightly against her stomach. During rush hour, she performed a limber dance when she saw fit, so as not to wind up pinched between the clammy meat of other bodies, their conversations, their fermented 6 o'clock breath. With time, she'd become conversant with the nature of trains, the polyphonies they carried and the nearness they created between strangers. Yet only a year ago, Nima, the freshly graduated daughter of 2 germaphobes, had vowed that she would never ever endure the subway. Though she'd been on and was fairly comfortable with the London Tube and the Hong Kong Metro, she'd heard awful stories about the New York version, that it was a parliament of rats, that even during daytime these rats swaggered onto platforms with the temerity of gangsters, charming passengers of New York's underworld so completely that they would laugh and snap away on smartphones. It sounded malignant, malarial. Presently she worked as a caretaker for an old white man, one Edward Rodwell Sr. She yearned for better things professionally, but the family paid her well enough that she could afford to rent a 2-bed apartment with a few other women. 15 stops was all the time it took to get from hers to the doors of Mr. Rodwell's home. It was all the time she had for herself now, a singer whose meaningful work was yet to take place, whose delay was made of old men in diapers. She made use of that half hour of time by studying scores or practicing Italian, which she found breezy, less difficult than the violent hailstone of German. She had not yet given up the dream of being a famous lyrico spinto. The trouble began last summer, a year after her graduation from a top conservatory in California and her easterly migration to New York. She was staying in her friend Julia's apartment, Julia having returned to Italy for the summer, and living the sort of unencumbered life that she was too embarrassed to admit to struggling friends. That July, her parents had called to inform her they were cutting her off. The shock of such a thing, not because she was still dependent at 23, but because it was so American of those 2 dignified Africans. She tried to appeal to their sense of self. What sort of Africans are you? To their memory. You can't tell me that you've forgotten what happened to Congo when the Belgians left. When even that failed, she refused to entertain the threat of despair that comes with the first fondles of chaos. She'd had several opportunities to practice this mental discipline in the years since she'd graduated, particularly when news broke among alumni that Annabel von Clyden, a girl she'd never taken seriously in school, was to be featured on Joyce DiDonato's new album. But that loosely held equanimity fell and cracked a week later, when she awoke one morning and found several missed calls from Julia and a desperate voicemail. "Nima, in the name of God, please call me." I'm going to skip ahead, but all you need to know is that Nima gets kicked out of Julia's apartment and turns to a man called Dr. Tom. Okay. A man of upper middle class provenance, Tom was a 48-year-old father involved in real estate. But to some, he called himself a doctor of happiness. Nima had first heard of Dr. Tom 3 years ago at a long weekend away in Montauk with Julia and some other friends. They spent the weekend in a glass-walled beach house, picnicking and smoking near the edge of the Atlantic. The house was within walking distance from Tom's, who would pop in to chat or to invite them to play tennis at his. Nima found it odd that a doctor was referred to by his first name. It was only after their little holiday had come to an end that she understood the real identity of Tom. Not a doctor of any acknowledgeable kind, but one whose practice involved many dealings with corrupt pharmacists statewide, and even several international cartels. When Nima called to ask Tom for his help, he said, "Listen, you're a great gal and I'd love to help you, but you're unemployed, you have no money. How do you plan on paying rent?" "By joining the business, how else?" He laughed at that, found it genuinely endearing, but questioned what she could do for him when he had one of the most efficient teams in New York. He was no racist, he said, but the business of happiness was best represented by young Brahmin white children. He attributed his success, his evasion of the law to this fact, and whilst he sold his stuff to Latinos and blacks, he'd never hire them to do the upfront work. It would be a kind of suicide. But Tom, whose son's nanny was an Oromo refugee, felt sorry for this foreign girl, whom he imagined had fled her shit pile of a country and flung herself into the prosperous embrace of the Julias of the world. This girl whom he'd been told wanted to be an opera singer. And so as long as Nima kept her operation smooth, secure and thriving, and as long as she paid Tom a small monthly fee of gratitude, she would have a home in the fashionable neighborhood of Greenwich Village. Thank you.
Before I got up, Fina said, "You're reading from your phone?" And there's a reason for that, which is that I carry my anxiety in my hands, and if I have paper, it's just going to go da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So this is a little easier. Specific acknowledgments to come on the acknowledgments page of my thesis when it's uploaded, and individual thank you sent out. But I will just say thank you to the community that I really never thought I would have. I feel deeply, deeply privileged to have been a part of this, and to be able to take all of you guys into the rest of my life. So thank you. I'm reading something that none of you have heard before, because I like to keep you on your toes. Oh, and I should probably give some context, which is that this is about this is about a 17th century female painter from Bologna, Italy. And And she was supposedly murdered by her maid at the age of 27. And the trial of that is available. The records have all been archived. And I read through it and I was fascinated. And the maid was convicted and exiled from the Papal States when she was basically in her late teens. She was an orphan and probably had a really terrible time of it. But I was fascinated. The artist is Elisabetta Serrani. Her most famous work is of Portia piercing her thigh with a needle and revealing these beautiful crimson beads of blood. It's just a beautifully vivid work, and I wanted to write something about that. Blood turns blue when it strikes sand. Mistress, I have been without my tongue in this land. I have been without custom. It was not long ago when I sat in the kitchen. My knuckles swelled against the heat, and I suckled on each ridge, licked the valleys clean of trickling lard. I saw my reflection in the side of the turning pig, and I ached for what I have now. This is what I desired. Yes, a bright wall of blue, uninterrupted. I sleep on the white sand. Creatures walk over my body. In the mornings, I have seen dogs soaking their feet in the tide. I have seen fishermen dragging nets. I have seen the salt in their beards. When they realized I was not a corpse, animal, or man, they had already half undressed me. Of all the violence I have known, this was the kindest. Their eyes crinkling at the sight of my bare flesh, blue, puckering like the things they dredge up from the water. I thought, their hands are like fish. Their hands are like the sea. How imprecise the sea is. What a smell it leaves behind even when you wish to be clean. All day I comb it from my hair. I brush it from my fingers. Mistress, I miss the needle, the knife point so fine that it drew only beads. When you painted them, they were like rubies. How did you make them so perfectly round? I know there is a village where the fishermen sleep. I know the dogs and the boys who accompany them cannot live far away. Still, I am not ready to be resourceful. I have had a life of resourcefulness. I am tired of being canny. I am content to eat what comes from the water. A time will come when that is not enough, and I will have to follow the men and the boys to their houses. I will have to make bargains. Let that time be far from now. Let it crawl its way here. For now I sleep in the sand. The dunes are full of sharp grass. Where the beach descends, the land turns white, the water turns bluer. But it is already so blue. The light here is different, mistress. I cannot find the shadow you so loved, even at night. I cannot find any crimson. I have to make it myself. It must come from me. Often I thought of the crackling pig on the spit. I still do. How many were there over the years? Your father was insatiable. Signor Serrani and his pigs, yes, and Gia forgoing things the kitchen needed so more of the budget could go to them. Their bodies so heavy to haul, their blemishes like ours. I would count their freckles before they burnt. To watch their skin heat and split was to know what would happen to a man. Yet we extended their lives too, hung them up like martyrs in split halves, made their flesh keep for years. The red of them cured to brown, the white yellowed at the edges, but was still a shock at its center. I remember her making fine incisions with her knife, peeling back a sliver of the leg in the cellar. It never aged. Each day there was less of it. She sliced another shaving, long and thin as paper, and your father folded it like cloth before he disappeared it into his mouth. But I still worried the leg would twitch and run. I could see it falling to the floor from its sharp mount, struggling to try and get up again. I see it now, mistress. I hear the clack of its hoof on the stone. I dream of the room adjacent to your father's chambers. Rarely I was invited to clean it, so grit accumulated in the creases. The smell when the doors opened was sour. Decaying canvas, unwashed skin, ancient food that found its way into corners, or beneath the heavy drapery he refused to open. I recall lifting a curtain and the velvet raising a thick cloud of dust, and beneath it the source of the most recent odor, a pomegranate half gone to rot, yellow as phlegm, its seeds swollen brown. When I lifted the soft bulb, a putrid juice ran down my wrist. I carried the fruit to the door. I threw it into the street and watched it burst against the stones. All day I could sense it on me, long after I had washed it off, the dribble that ran the length of my forearm, the sudden turn it had taken in the crook of my elbow. Where had he sourced it, I wondered. He must have stolen it from you. When pomegranates were bought for the house, they went first to the studio. How many did you have, placed into the center of their circle of canvases? I would come with a table if it was needed, to better lift the fruit into the thick shafts of golden light. I remember your eyes on me as I moved the display from one end of the table to the other, gathered the cloth and placed each piece within its folds. Your instructions quick and sharp. Remove 6 seeds. Scatter them across this corner of the satin. No, the shadows are wrong. Too flat. That isn't deep enough, Lucia. Pinch it with your fingers. There. Fine. During the trial, I was defended for my attendance of confession, my daily prayers. I was humble, they said, and only combed my hair on Tuesdays and Sundays. I did not adorn myself in any way. I sought no attention from men and was committed to my tasks, the floors, the kitchen, Signora Serrani's door. I was trusted intensely, more so than most servants. Very well, said the prosecution, but was it true that I controlled access to Signora Serrani's studio? Yes. And true that I alone controlled access to her chambers? Yes, that was true, too. And it was my hand that delivered all of her meals when she worked. Yes, I said. No one else was allowed but me? Signora Serrani allowed only me? Yes, yes, that is all true. I never lied. Mistress, I began to think as I sat there. There was so much I controlled in that house, so many keys I held on my ring. That is what they said, and I could not disagree with them. It all was true. But I had never realized it before. All that time, I had longed to be free. I had seen myself on the end of a chain. But I could have locked you all inside, mistress. I had the keys. I could have escorted each of you to your chambers, closed the door, sealed you in place. And only I could return to let you out again. If I waited years, I might come back to find your father, swaddled in salt, the flesh of his legs shaved back. Your mother and sisters hanging from a hook in the ceiling, each of them carved into 4 pieces. But in your chambers, the key would turn as if the lock was freshly oiled. You would be dressed in crimson, in blue, the edges of the room cast in shadow, but your face gleaming like an angel, uninterrupted. Out would come the needle, your paint-stained knuckles unsheathed. On your exposed thigh, rubies. Between your fingers, pearls. Mistress, I did not kill you, but what a privilege it would have been. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all. This is special. And Fred, thank you for filming. Linger, dance, play. It's what we normally should be doing. Wonderful. Thanks, everybody.
We do have a small parting gift for the graduates. The first and second years came through with the annual poster, so we have a few posters for you guys to take home with you.